Hello and welcome to my preseason guide for Sona for season 12 or season 2022. I think that's what Riot calls it now. I don't know why. Anyways, a lot of things to go through. New runes for Sona, new items, different indirect buffs, nerfs. Let's go straight into it. Quick mention, if you don't want to watch the whole video, but you wanted to see like a specific item that you know that's changed, or rune, or whatever, I'll put like a chapter or bookmark on the video thingy so you can go straight to it instead of watching the whole video. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is First Strike, which is the new rune in the inspiration tree. This rune is probably going to be like contested if you want to play Ahri or First Strike, which is good because 90% of the time you want to go Ahri. There is some matchups where First Strike is pretty much unplayable. I'll get into that a little bit later. So what First Strike does is if you do the first damage when your rune is up, you receive pretty much more gold. And within 3 seconds after that initial damage, you do a little bit more damage, and then the damage you do within that 3 seconds, you'll gain gold as well. So basically is if you do the first damage, you gain more gold and a little bit more damage. However, if you are hit when you have the rune up, it goes back on cooldown. Since Sona's really good at like poking first because of a Q range, generally it's easy to proc the rune. You're just gonna make sure you Q when the rune is up, and not when it's on cooldown. Now you'd be thinking, does DOT type champions like Brand, the consistent damage, will that knock off First Strike? Well, from what it says, it does not. So against DOT champions, it's still okay to take First Strike. It's just that they have to apply a new ability for it to knock off First Strike. This rune is also really good for support Sona, as well as mid Sona. Support Sona mainly because once you finish your support item gold, you don't really have any income. So the First Strike basically gives you a little bit more gold to get to your second item, especially if you want to get something that's more expensive. Generally when you get your second item as a support, you can get like another support item, but you know, sometimes you want to go a little bit more expensive items in Sona, so First Strike there will help. The other thing is, since it's in the inspiration tree, you're not going to take the sorcery tree first. So your second runes, you can either go like Presence of Mind or the precision tree or the sorcery tree, but what I normally take on the inspiration tree is magical footwear, cookies, and the cooldown on items and summoner spells. You can go the hourglass or the futures market, that's up to you, but the first bits is what I mainly prefer to use. So for Sona mid, First Strike is still really good. You can generally Q first, so you will still get gold from First Strike. I know when I play Sona mid, I can't see us very well, I can't really clear the waves very well. So the First Strike there for more gold will be relevant to get to your first item and not be so far behind against the other mid laner, which we will get into next. So this isn't really a new thing, but it was kind of changed, I think like 2-3 patches ago. But if you play Sona mid and you go tier first item, if you just spam Q before lane phase, you'll gain mana stacks or tiers. So if you spam Q and like you're near an ally and then you recall at like 55 seconds and then you get back into lane before it starts, you can get up to like 40 extra max mana with your tier before the lane even starts. I don't think most Sona players know that. Wasn't really recognized because it hasn't been like that for a long time. But if you do play Sona mid and you go tier first item, I highly suggest doing that. So the starting item Doran's Ring has been changed. So instead of CSing a minion and gaining mana back, it's basically just like a flat mana over time. Unless you hit a champion being in combat, you gain more mana over time. So a lot of people who play Sona mid or Sona support, they will reset and then they will get their tier to start stacking for late game. But if you want to play early game Sona, you can get a Doran's Ring, go back into lane, and just play the game normally. But instead of having the tier, Doran's Ring will give you more mana over time, which means you will just have more mana in lane to spam your abilities. But on top of that, you also gain, I think, 15 more AP and 70 HP. So in lane, you're gonna be a little bit more tankier, I guess, a bit more AP. So you'd be a lot stronger in lane phase. Whereas if you just got tier, you're just basically just stacking for more mana for late game, which is perfectly fine. It's just that Doran's ring is more early game, lane phase, sustain, a little bit more tanky, which you can also sell for like 160 gold if you need to get like into your first item and you're not really reliant on mana sustain anymore. But I think it's a really good, really quick, cheesy first recall, more mana spike for Sona in lane. The last thing to add here, which isn't really relevant, but like if your like ADC is gone and they're resetting and you're trying to like last hit, I guess Doran's ring has 5 more damage to minions, so you can maybe see us a little bit better, get a little bit more gold. That's cool, but not as, you know, relevant. So the next item I'm going to talk about, which is a mythic, which is my most favorite mythic, is Everfrost. Everfrost is now 400 gold cheaper, which makes it a lot easier to buy as a support, since trying to get to your first item as soon as possible is important, as well as trying to get 2 items in a game is important too. Normally if you're trying to buy an expensive item as a support, it's hard to get the 2 items because you don't have the gold efficiency. So it being cheaper is good. Having First Strike, which is more gold, helps it too. That's also good. And the third thing is, since I'm a player that really doesn't like Moonstone because it's really uninteractive and boring to use, in my opinion, if you use Moonstone, it's totally fine. If you don't like Moonstone, Everfrost is really good. It gives her max AP, not max AP, max mana, a lot of AP, cooldown reduction or haste, and a active item, which is kind of like Sona's ult, which roots and does damage. So like if Sona doesn't have her ult up, having Everfrost there to like make plays or to do stuff and still be relevant when not having ult is still really good too. So if you don't like Moonstone or you want to have your champion feel like it's doing something, I highly suggest try Everfrost. It's really good. The last really important thing to add with Everfrost is it's kind of like how last season started with the support items requiring Blasting Wand, which got changed into Amplifying Tome because it's hard to have that much gold as a support since you don't really have that high gold efficiency quickly. Everfrost is like that too. You don't have to buy a Blasting Wand since it's a little bit nerfed because it's cheaper. So instead of Blasting Wand, you just have to buy an Amplifying Tome, which makes it so much more easier to buy into as a support. So one of the new AP items for this season is Crown of the Shattered Queen. It's kind of like Banshee's Veil passive wise, just more like AP stat based. It's got the same stats as Everfrost, giving AP, health, max mana, ability haste, except just the passive's different. So pretty much what it does is if you get hit and any damage within 1.5 seconds, you reduce 75% of it. So they only do 25% of the damage. So since Sona's a squishy champion, they can't one-shot you. However, it's got the same issue as Banshee's Veil, and that's against DOT champions like Brand or high consistency champions that do a lot of damage, because if your passive's going to come up, Brand is just going to proc it, and then you're not going to have the safeguard passive, and it's going to be irrelevant. So I guess into DOT champions and high consistency champions do damage, this is probably not really going to be a good item to buy. It's mainly just like if a champion literally just one-shots you and they have like no like initial damage to proc it off, it's good against those champions. But stat-wise, it's still decent. It's kind of like Everfrost, just the passive's different. The only other thing that makes it decent for Sona is like, say, if some champion like LeBlanc, who can proc the ability off and then one-shot you, you kind of have like time to set up to use your reduced damage passive chord. So like when they actually think that they can kill you because it's on cooldown, they will go in, you use the reduced damage, you still kind of live again, and then they have to wait for their cooldowns. The good thing about this item is it's only like 40-second cooldown. So if you're going like First Strike and you're taking the item haste cooldown reduction, it's like 40 seconds to like 38. So they only have like a 38 time window to actually kill you, and then you have your reduced damage to keep you alive when you do have it on cooldown. A big thing to mention with this item, it's only good for Sona mid players, not support players, because of course support players can go Moonstone, Everfrost, and Shreyas, which is a lot better than this item. It's just that if you're playing Sona mid and you're versing a champion that literally just make you unable to play the game entirely, and you just really want to play Sona mid lane, this item is really good just to just keep in the game, sustain, and then try to get to your second item spike or whatever. So it's really only niche if you're just playing Sona mid, not support. So the next item that's probably going to affect Sona a lot if you build the item is Seraph's Embrace, which is the tier item that goes into Archangel Staff, and then you stack it and then you get Seraph's Embrace. The passives have changed where the more mana you have, the more haste you have, instead of it being AP. So generally when you have Seraph's Embrace, you have like a lot of mana to spam whatever you want, and this is going to give you more haste. So you can spam even more on Sona, which isn't the broken part about this item. I think the haste is probably a little bit better than the AP if you're wanting to spam more. It's just that the other passive is every time you press an ability, you gain HP. So if you press Q, 50 extra HP. You press W, 80 extra HP, because it stacks by how much the spell costs is plus AP. So if you keep spamming your abilities, you're just always going to be max HP. If you're going to like PvP and someone's trying to kill you, you're just going to go back up to HP. It's like having Moonstone but on yourself, but you don't have to be in combat either. So like if you're like almost dying, you have no HP, you just spam all your abilities like you do with Moonstone, and then you just get healed yourself to full, which is, I guess, kind of broken. I think Sona this patch is probably going to be either she's going to get nerfed or all these items have to get nerfed themselves, because I think Sona's going to be really, really strong this patch. So what this means is, as a support Sona, you can probably get Seraph's Embrace as first item, because you're getting AP, you're getting max mana, you're getting haste by max mana, and then you get a little bit of HP. So you're pretty much getting everything in one item, as long as you stack your tier like quickly, which you can as a support Sona. So I highly suggest building this item first, see how it feels, because I'm pretty sure next patch this item's gonna get nerfed. It's definitely overstat. So enjoy this item while you can. So one of the items that I definitely think is overlooked that can be good on Sona situationally is Knight's Vow. Now you try to think that like, well, Knight's Vow doesn't really give her AP or doesn't really give her mana. It's not meant to be like a item that gives her stats. It's more just the passive itself. So what the passive does now, since they've changed it again, is your ally will take 10% less damage, which will be taken to you, and then when they do damage, you heal 8% of their damage. Which means since Sona heals and shields, and then shields her ally and heals her ally, you're not really taking any of that 10% damage, and you're just making your ally 10% stronger with damage. But if they're below 30% HP, you take 20% of the damage, which makes them 20% resistant to damage, and since you're healing and shielding yourself as well, you're not taking any of that damage. So say if you're versing a champion on the enemy team that's like super fed and they're trying to like 1v9, this item will actually really stop them to carry the game and make your ally, you know, sustain a little bit longer in fights. And you're not going to take any damage either, because when they do damage too, you're going to get healed back. So it's a really good like dueling 2v2 item, or trying to like stop an enemy from like 1v9ing. It's definitely an underrated item, and I think is very, very good in niche situations. The other thing that makes this item really good is when you're behind as Sona and you're trying to get like extra damage or trying to heal a little bit more, generally when you're behind, healing isn't so relevant because the enemy team's all fed and they're just going to out damage your healing, which makes you less relevant. So the reduced damage on your ally, which stops them from doing more damage, is more effective than if you were to just buy Staff of the Flowing Water or, you know, a different support item, unless you're building anti-damage or anti-heal, which stops them from healing. So it's either like Chemtech, which reduces their healing, or this, which reduces their damage. So you get more choices to play the game depending on the situation. So the last item I want to talk about that some Sona mains have been thinking of that might be good, which is Fimbulwinter. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's kind of like Sarah's Embrace with like the tier stacking. It's just a more tinky version. So instead of getting AP, you gain more health. And instead of the passive giving you haste and sustain HP, if you immobilize an enemy as a ranged champion, you gain a shield, which you can only get if you ult with Sona. But if you ult, they're stunned. You're not really using the shield unless there's someone else attacking you. The shield is used based on mana, so like it will take your mana out and then you absorb, which is basically a shield based on how much mana you have. Again, if there's more champions near you, the shield is a lot bigger. So the only other way you can proc this item is if you have Everfrost. So like say if a lot of champions are coming at you, you stun one of them, you gain a massive shield, and then you still have your ult as well. So it's kind of like a more of a tanky way. I still say that Sarah's Embrace is 100% because it's broken, better than this item, but you can go this item if you want to be a little bit more tanky. With that being said, if you want to go the tank Sona route, which is definitely possible this season, you can go Abyssal's Mask, where if you want to verse against an AP based comp, if players are coming at you and are trying to kill you but you're a little bit tanky, you reduce their magic resist, which makes other players who do AP damage do more AP damage to them. So that's pretty much all the items and the rune that Sona is affected with that you can try that is different this patch. Of course, there's like other ways you can play Sona, but these are the things that have changed this season with Sona. So with that being said, there is an indirect buff and debuff with Sona this patch. One of the indirect buffs that Sona gets is the bounties. So one thing, or most of the games that when you play Sona that you lose is probably before 10 minutes. Someone's whining, they want to FF, they don't want to play, they disconnect. You can't play the game, you can't scale as your champion, and then you just kind of feel relevant and be like, oh, okay. So what bounties do is if you're behind, there is something on the map that you can objectively take to give your team more gold, which means Sona gains more gold in a losing early game, and your teammates won't FF and won't give up, which means you can still play the game and scale, which is a big buff for Sona. Most of my games end at 10 minutes, so this is definitely a big buff that that Sona will receive this patch. So one of the indirect nerfs for Sona this patch is from the new mage item, Shadowflames. This is the new mage anti-shield item. So when a enemy champion is shielded or recently shielded, I don't know the times, it just says recently, I have no clue, they receive the maximum amount of magic pen to that champion, which is, I think it's like 20% magic pen, which is quite a lot. So since Sona's shields aren't that high compared to other champions that shield, and since she literally shields her whole team in team fights, you're pretty much like debuffing your whole team to take 20% more magic pen, which I guess is a massive debuff since Sona's shields aren't that high, and you're kind of making your whole team more squishier than if you didn't shield. Especially if champion has that item and you have like a really strong tank that is very magic resistant, I highly suggest do not shield if you can. Do not shield that tank because you're making them so much more squishier if you shield them and they have that item. So it's one thing just to keep in mind. If you see that item, just be a little bit more mindful when shielding in team fights. So the last thing I want to talk about, which really isn't relevant, that's like the new Drakes. They don't really affect Sona. They're just more damage Drakes, I guess. The Chemtech one does more damage, lower HP. The other one does more damage. That's like on a cooldown. They just do damage. Doesn't really change Sona much. The Cloud Drake's probably the only one that does change things a little bit because the slow resistance kind of useful. But mainly the out of combat movement speed. Generally when Riot nerfs champions by 5 movement speed, the Cloud Drake, for one Cloud Drake, it gives you like 3-4 movement speed. So if you have like 2, that's 8 more movement speed. It isn't a lot when you statistically look at it, but when you play a game and you move a little bit quicker to roam, move a little bit quicker to ward things, it definitely does have its place. You just won't physically feel it, but it's definitely there. Sona's a really good roaming champion because of her E to like ward or to do things around the map. So yeah, that's probably about it for Drake's. Not much changes. I mean, obviously it's going to change the game. Just Sona specifically, it's just, yeah. So that's pretty much it for the preseason. Well, for Sona anyways. My overall thoughts with the items, there's definitely a lot of different items you can nichely pick into situations over just picking the same item every single game. I do think that Sona is probably going to be really strong because of Everfrost being cheaper and Sarah's Embrace being OP as hell. Definitely going to get nerfed. Bounties is probably one of the most biggest things too, because you know your team won't FF or AFK early, so you can actually play the game before like after 10 minutes. Yeah, I definitely think that Sona's definitely going to be strong. I wouldn't be surprised in some way there is going to be a nerf that directly affects her. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If there is anything I have missed and you want to know about it, just message and I'll just give my best response on it, or maybe other people might. But besides that, I hope you all enjoy preseason. Have fun.